Every contact tradition in the modern UFO era has a shadow side. The Greys take without asking. The reptilians intimidate and control. The underground base accounts speak of clinical indifference to human suffering. The abduction literature, for all its extraordinary evidential weight, is built on a foundation of experiences that witnesses almost universally describe as terrifying, unwanted, and deeply traumatic. Then there are the Pleiadians. Tall, beautiful, calm beyond anything ordinary human experience produces, with golden hair and eyes that carry a depth of intelligence and compassion that witnesses who have encountered them consistently struggle to find adequate language for, arriving not in clinical craft interiors, but in environments of extraordinary beauty, speaking not of harvesting and hybrid programs, but of love, of humanity's potential, of an ancient connection between their civilization and ours that predates recorded human history. The Pleiadian contact tradition is the oldest, the most cross-referenced, and the most internally consistent benevolent contact account in the entire modern UFO literature. It appears in the 1950s contactee era. It appears in the most extensively documented contact case in history. It appears in regression hypnosis from witnesses who had no access to each other's testimony. It appears in channeled material from sources across multiple countries and multiple decades. And it always describes the same beings, from the same place, with the same message. Something about humanity is worth saving, and they have been trying to help us save it for a very long time. The Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, one of the most recognizable star clusters in the night sky, visible to the naked eye from every inhabited continent on Earth, referenced in the mythology and the cosmology of cultures so geographically and historically separated that their independent veneration of the same cluster of stars has itself been noted by anthropologists as one of the most remarkable cross-cultural convergences in the history of human mythology. The ancient Greeks saw the seven daughters of Atlas transformed into stars to save them from the pursuit of Orion. The Aboriginal Australians of the Kimberley region described the Pleiades as a group of women pursued across the sky. The Hopi of the American Southwest incorporated the Pleiades into their ceremonial calendar. The Maori of New Zealand named them Matariki and used their heliacal rising to mark the new year. The ancient Egyptians aligned the entrances of their temples to the Pleiades. The ancient Sumerians called them the Seven Judges, 7 stars, seen and venerated independently by cultures across every continent, across thousands of years of human history, with a consistency and a reverence that no other star cluster in the night sky has received. The Pleiadian contact tradition of the modern UFO era did not invent this association. It inherited it, and what the beings described in that tradition have communicated to the witnesses who encountered them suggests that the inheritance was not accidental. The Pleiades open cluster sits approximately 440 light-years from Earth in the constellation Taurus. It contains hundreds of stars, of which the 7 brightest are visible to the naked eye under good conditions. The cluster's most prominent stars are young hot blue-white stars of spectral types B and A, considerably younger and considerably hotter than Earth's own sun. They burn with a brilliance and a blue-white intensity that gives the cluster its distinctive appearance in the night sky. This astronomical detail is significant because of what it implies about the worlds that witnesses describe when they report being shown or taken to Pleiadian home environments. The light on those worlds would be different from the light on Earth. Not the warm yellow gold of a G-type sun, like our own, but a brighter, more intense, more blue-white quality of light that would render colors differently. That would make the landscape appear more vivid. That would give vegetation and water and sky a quality of luminosity that witnesses consistently describe as overwhelming in its beauty. And that is exactly what they describe. The modern Pleiadian contact tradition begins in the early 1950s with the contactee era. George Adamski described beings of Nordic appearance who communicated peaceful and philosophical messages. Howard Menger reported beautiful golden-haired beings who arrived in New Jersey fields with the same quality of calm and wisdom. Orfeo Angelucci described beings of extraordinary luminosity who communicated through screens and direct transmission. George Van Tassel, Frank Stranges, Daniel Fry, all of them reported the same fundamental type: tall, beautiful, human in appearance, but carrying a quality of presence that distinguished them immediately and unmistakably from ordinary human beings. The skeptic's argument against the contactee era is straightforward. These were Cold War-era accounts from a period of cultural anxiety about nuclear weapons and Soviet aggression. The messages the beings communicated, peace, nuclear disarmament, human brotherhood, were the messages that the cultural moment demanded. The beautiful Nordic beings were a projection of post-war Western ideals of physical perfection onto a sky full of hope. It is a coherent argument. Until you reach Edward Billy Meier. Edward Albert Meier was born on February 3, 1937, in Bulak, in the canton of Zurich, Switzerland. He lost his right arm in an accident. He lived on a farm in Hinterschmidrudi, in the Swiss canton of Zurich, with his family and a community of people who had gathered around his contact experiences. He began reporting contacts with beings he called the Pleiadian in January 1975. Being who initiated contact with him was named Senjays, a woman of extraordinary physical appearance by his account, tall and blonde with a calm and composed manner that he found immediately and profoundly distinctive. The contacts continued across decades. Hundreds of individual contact sessions. Conversations that Meier recorded in what he called the contact reports, a body of written documentation that runs to thousands of pages and constitutes the most extensive body of direct alleged alien communication ever recorded by a single witness. But it was not the contact reports that brought the world's attention to the Meier case. It was the photographs. Meier produced hundreds of photographs of the Pleiadian craft called beamships across the years of his contact. Images taken in the Swiss countryside of metallic disc-shaped objects hovering above the landscape with a clarity and a detail that the photographic analysis of the era found genuinely difficult to account for through conventional hoax techniques. Film footage, sound recordings, metal samples that were submitted to Marcel Vogel, a senior research scientist at IBM, for analysis. Vogel concluded that the metal samples could not have been produced by any known terrestrial manufacturing process. A one-armed farmer living on a rural Swiss property, producing hundreds of photographs of craft, miles of film footage, sound recordings, and physical metal samples that an IBM scientist could not account for through conventional explanation. The Pleiadian contact tradition suddenly had a very different evidential foundation than the contactee era had provided. What Meier recorded across his contact reports about the Pleiadian home worlds represents the most detailed description of Pleiadian civilization in the literature. The Plejaren, as he understood them, did not originate in the Pleiades star cluster itself. They had done so historically, but had relocated to a dimensional plane slightly removed from the physical plane the human instruments could detect. Their original worlds in the Pleiades cluster had been their home for an extraordinary span of time, a civilization measured not in centuries or millennia, but in hundreds of thousands of years. The worlds he described through his contact sessions were consistent with what the physical parameters of the Pleiades cluster would produce. Lush and extraordinarily beautiful environments, rich vegetation of colors and qualities that exceeded anything on Earth, water in abundance, an atmosphere of clarity and freshness, architecture of curved white forms that appeared to have grown from the landscape rather than been imposed upon it, cities of remarkable beauty integrated so completely with their natural settings that the boundary between the built and the natural environments was difficult to identify. No pollution, no scarcity, no hierarchical political structures of the kind that have characterized human civilization throughout its recorded history. Decisions made collectively. A society organized around principles of individual development and collective harmony that human political philosophy had theorized about but never achieved. Beings uniformly of Nordic physical type, tall, blonde, with eyes that witnesses consistently, described as carrying a quality of calm intelligence and compassion that goes beyond anything produced by the emotional range of ordinary human experience. The Pleiadian connection to Earth history is the element of the contact tradition that researchers and investigators have found most consistently remarkable precisely because of where it appears. It appears in Niers contact reports, where the Plejaren describe a historical involvement with early human civilizations that includes a genetic contribution to the development of humanity as a species. It appears in regression hypnosis sessions conducted with abductees who reported Pleiadian rather than gray contact, where witnesses with no knowledge of the Meier case or of each other's testimony described being told about an ancient relationship between the Plejaren and early human populations. It appears in channeled material from sources across multiple countries and multiple decades, where the Pleiadian origin point and the genetic ancestor or seeder of humanity narrative appear consistently across communications that were produced independently and without reference to the existing Meier literature. The convergence of this specific and historically extraordinary claim that the beings from the Pleiades cluster were involved in the genetic development of early humanity across independent sources that had no mechanism for coordinating their testimony has been noted by researchers examining the Pleiadian tradition as one of its most significant and most difficult to dismiss features. The physical descriptions of the Pleiadian worlds that emerge across the accumulated testimony of contactees, regression subjects, and channeled sources share specific characteristics that exceed what cultural contamination alone can account for. The quality of the light on those worlds, consistently described as more brilliant and more vivid than sunlight on Earth, consistent with the blue-white spectral type of the Pleiades cluster stars. The vegetation, consistently described as more richly colored than Earth vegetation, with hues that witnesses struggle to name because no equivalent color appears in their ordinary experience. The water, consistently described as extraordinarily pure and present in abundance, in landscapes of lakes and rivers of a clarity that witnesses find overwhelming. The architecture, consistently described as curved, white, or pale, integrated with a natural landscape, built from materials that appear to have a living quality. The beings, consistently tall, consistently blonde, consistently calm, consistently described as carrying a quality of wisdom and compassion that witnesses find both immediately apparent and impossible to fully articulate. This consistency across independent sources, separated by geography, by time, and by cultural context, is the same quality of cross-referenced evidence that researchers point to when arguing for the reality of the gray being description. Applied to the Pleiadian tradition, it produces an equally compelling case for a genuine external source behind the contact accounts. Billy Meier's case alone represents enough material for multiple dedicated videos. The photographs, the film footage, the metal samples, and the IBM analysis. The contact reports and the specific content of what the Plejaren communicated about their history, their technology, and their relationship with humanity. The specific predictions that Meier recorded in the 1970s that subsequent events have been found to match. But the Pleiadian contact tradition is larger than any single case. It is the accumulated testimony of decades of independent contact accounts from witnesses across the world who describe the same beings, the same worlds, and the same ancient connection to humanity. The oldest recurring contact tradition in the modern UFO era, the most visually beautiful, the most consistently benevolent, and the one that carries, embedded in its most specific and most cross-referenced claims, the most extraordinary suggestion of all, that we did not develop alone. That somewhere in the brilliance of those 7 stars that every human culture throughout history has looked up at and found reason to venerate, there is a civilization that was old when humanity was young, and that it has been watching over us ever since. Not every case in this series will shake you, but some of them will. This was one of them. If you felt that, subscribe, because we have more coming that will hit just as hard. Drop a comment below and tell us where you land on the Pleiadian tradition, the most elaborate and most sustained contact mythology ever constructed, or the most ancient and most evidentially supported connection between humanity and another civilization that the modern world has produced. The debate is open, and we want to hear where you stand.